Okay, folks, it is a few minutes after 2, so I'm just going to go ahead and get started. I am Sky David. I am the NC CASA staff attorney, and today we're just going to be talking about advocacy at all levels of government. We're going to start with just a basic overview and then kind of get into specific in North Carolina, what NC CASA's legislative agenda looks like for 2021, 2022, and a preview of our advocacy toolkit that you can use and share with your folks as well. Just as we start, like we always do, I want to talk about NC CASA's purpose. We are the Coalition Against Sexual Assault, and we are an inclusive statewide alliance working to end sexual violence through education, advocacy, and legislation. We do use a social justice framework. Our work is done from a strong intersectional social justice perspective. These are just a couple of the things that we do at NC CASA. And if you have any requests for programming, you feel free to drop those in the chat or send us an email after this webinar is over. Okay, we'll start with the basic levels of government. So I'll start at the top level, federal government. State government, and that's here in Raleigh, and local government like your school board, city councils, county commission. We are encouraging our programs to be active at each level of government. So for our congressional delegation, this little pictorial is from our advocacy toolkit. And when you go on our advocacy toolkit, you can click on any of these links and it will take you to their page. And these are in order from District 1 through District 12 for who are our congressional delegation. And since they were all sworn in on Sunday, these are your current Congress members. Our senators are Richard Burr and Tom Tillis. They are also current. It's no secret that Senator Burr is not running for his seat again in 2022, but Tom Tillis just won his seat, so he will be there for the next 6 years. And again, they are included on our advocacy toolkit. You can just click their names and it'll take you to their pages. So talking about the federal government timeline, I should start by saying the House Judiciary Committee has committed to taking up the VOCA fix in the next Congress as far as our priorities go. We'll talk a little bit about that later, but I wanted to start with that. But also note, like I said, folks have been in Congress this week. I think everyone is fairly aware that Congress is meeting due to the events yesterday. The Senate began on January 3rd, and then yesterday was that joint session. Again, I think we're all acutely aware of that. And both after this week, both the House and the Senate won't return until inauguration. At the state level, which is what I'm going to be focusing mostly on, I'll just cover our general branches here. So the General Assembly really covers policy ideas, laws, and appointments. The executive branch, so the Governor Cooper, covers vetoes, appointments, and he also has a bully pulpit. I should say that they split appointments between the executive branch and the General Assembly. There have been times when the General Assembly has tried to take all appointments, even when both parties control the General Assembly and the governorship. And there has been legislation to say that they can't do that because there was a court case that went up, McCrory v. Berger, that said you have to split that sort of power. And our judicial branch does serve as that check on the legislative branch here in North Carolina. All right, as we go into our 2021 legislative session, I'm just going to cover kind of what it looks like right now. So the North Carolina House has 69 Republicans and 51 Democrats. In our past biennium, there were 65 Republicans and 55 Democrats. So as you can see, Democrats lost 4 seats in the North Carolina House. Now over on the Senate side, there are 22 Democrats and 28 Republicans. Last session, there were 29 Republicans and 21 Democrats. So Democrats gained a net of 1 seat over in the Senate. Some lost races, you can see here, Scott Brewer, Christy Clark, Ray Russell, Josam Queen, and Sydney Batch all lost their seats. On the Republican side, Stephen Ross and Perrin Jones lost their seats. And then there was an open seat that Jeff Zinger won. And so these are some of the big losses, including in Mecklenburg and in Wake County, Democrats lost those seats. Over on the Senate side, Harper Peterson in New Hanover County lost his seat. I think a lot of folks were fairly surprised by that. It was in a rematch. And then there are a couple open seats that Democrats gained, and then Republicans gained 1 open seat, and that's how that shook out to that 22-28 split. So as we talk about the General Assembly, and in the context of our work here, I would note that this General Assembly did pass all of NC CASA's legislative priorities this past biennium. And so we do expect that no matter who's in charge, our issues will be bipartisan. But if the governor were to veto a piece of legislation, the Democrats need 48 votes to stick with the governor in order to sustain a veto. In last session, they did not need so many votes. They only needed 7 folks to vote with the Republicans, and then they could override the governor. And if anybody is missing, that changes the vote count. It is a 3/5 vote to override a veto. So if a few people are missing, that does change the numbers. And over on the Senate side, 20 folks have to vote against an override. And so that means that just 2 people need to vote with the Republicans in order to override the governor. But I should say both chambers can hold a veto. The numbers were better for Republicans in last biennium, and there were bills that went through that there were some Democrats who strayed from the party, voted with Republicans, but once the governor vetoed it, they always come back home and vote with the governor. So let's say, for example, if there is a budget, and this year we're not operating on a budget, we are operating at standard level because the General Assembly didn't pass a budget because the governor vetoed it. And so if there is a budget that includes more funding for rape crisis centers and the governor vetoes that budget, it could be a potential situation where we're watching that very closely in the context of our work. Some challenges from this new General Assembly. I just want to highlight here that the urban and rural districts both increased their voting percentages this year, and the urban-rural divide was really highlighted. This split General Assembly will require strategic thinking around legislative agendas. And just because a veto sustaining number was achieved, Democrats will stray. Like I said, they tend to come home once the governor vetoes a bill, but there are many cases where folks vote with the other party. And so that's just something to keep in mind. We do think that the 2021-2022 General Assembly sessions will be very long. So as far as what that looks like, the General Assembly timeline for 2021-2022, I'll start by saying that when the General Assembly comes into session, it's a 2-year biennium. So we could say that this is just our agenda for 2021, but it is for a 2-year period, and bills that are filed for that 2-year period. So what happens is that the General Assembly will come back on January 13. They'll vote for their leaders, which have already been announced on both sides, but they have to have an official vote. And so they do that on that day, and they swear in new members, and then they go back home for a couple weeks and come back at the end of the month, January 26th, to start the long session. When they do return, that will be to write a biennium budget and take up other policy needs. Looking at the timeline for what this will look like, likely bill filing deadline will be in March. So you will see a flurry of bills from February to the end of March. And there is a date that the General Assembly sets every biennium, which is not out yet. It'll be in the House rules and the Senate rules. That is called crossover. And so for a bill to be eligible for the session, and again, the session is that 2-year period, a bill has to have passed one chamber by a certain date, unless it has money attached to it. So if it's simply just a policy bill, it has to pass by a certain date. And usually that date is at the end of April or the beginning of May in the first year of the biennium. So the bills have to be filed by March-ish. Again, we'll know harder dates once the General Assembly returns, but then they have to pass one of the 2 chambers by April-ish, maybe early May. So that kind of constrains, shows you that a lot of the work has to be done up front to get it past a chamber in order for it to be eligible for the rest of the session. And once a bill does pass, let's say it passes the House by that date, over on the Senate side, they have until the end of 2022 to pass that bill. But if a bill doesn't pass either chamber and we pass that date, it either has to have an appropriation or has to do with like redistricting or a constitutional issue for it to be eligible to still pass out of that chamber past that date.
You have a question.
Okay.
In the chat. Lauren asked, with no budget, do you have to go elsewhere for funds?
So that is a great question. And I will say that like rape crisis centers are a line item in the budget. And in about 2015, the General Assembly saw that this could be an issue where a budget was vetoed and then we didn't have a budget. And at the federal government, if that were to happen, the government would go into a shutdown. We do not have that in North Carolina. If a budget has not been passed by July 1, which is the fiscal year for the state, we automatically revert back to the prior year's funding levels. So if nobody, if there are no increases or a budget isn't passed, everyone is funded who was in the previous year's budget at those prior year funding levels. So we have remained stagnant in our funding for rape crisis centers for about 10 years now. And so it didn't make a difference for our funding purposes, but for additional funds, yes, you would have to go elsewhere. Thank you for the question. Other thing that I just want to note is for this General Assembly and this state legislative session that because we are in a recession and we don't know what those numbers will look like because of COVID, what the state's money looks like essentially, We don't know how much money they will have in excess. Generally, North Carolina has had a surplus in funding the past 8 years. And this year we do expect there to be a budget shortfall. We haven't collected as much as we have committed to giving out. And because of that, some people are going to be cut in the budget. This is not a great year to be going and asking for money, but we have heard some rumors that say North Carolina has recovered from COVID a lot faster than other states, but no one has seen real numbers on what that looks like. We also saved a bunch of money because we didn't pass a budget, and so we didn't have any new spending. It was just stagnant spending from the prior year. So what those numbers will shake out to be are still up in the air right now. But I would say it's a better year to go to the General Assembly with policy ideas instead of money asks. That's just an overall view. As far as your local government goes, you have your school boards, your county commissioners, city council members, mayors. I would like to note here that in our advocacy toolkit, it has links to all of these folks for you as well. I also just want to note that your city council, just like the state government, they do have some appropriation to play with. And I know that we have city councils and county commissions across the state who give money, they appropriate money to rape crisis centers. So if you're not already actively engaged with your folks at that local level, I highly encourage you to create that relationship. And again, I keep plugging the toolkit, but it does have some templates for like a congratulatory letter to send to folks right after the election, or right now would be a great time to do that. And you can just kind of fill that in and have them either virtually, if you want to have a Zoom to talk to them or show them around your program, like any of that would be really helpful to you to get some of that additional funding. So thank you. There's a link to the toolkit, and I will show that here in a bit as well. So advocating for survivors, agencies, and the movement, I just want to say a blanket statement that creating meaningful relationships at all levels of government will help you, survivors, your programs, our state, and our country to be a place that understands and works together to end sexual violence. I have gotten to the point where if there is something happening with VOCA or VAWA, there's somebody in Senator Burr's office who will just send me an email and is like, I expect we'll be hearing from you about this in the next 24 hours, because they know that I'm just going to contact them. And that helps you create a relationship with those offices so that when you do need something, they'll help you. Now we're going to get into the advocacy toolkit a little bit more. So lobbying versus advocacy, what's the difference? So lobbying is a specific attempt to influence a specific piece of legislation at either federal, state, or local level. And advocacy is educating about an issue or a topic. So under your nonprofit restrictions, it's lobbying that y'all seem to be terrified of. Consider the amount of times that you have lobbied on a particular piece of legislation. Actually ask someone to vote yes or no on a specific issue. So it's probably not that often. You may have said, let me teach you about this issue, blah, 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 and talk about it, but you didn't ask that individual to vote against a bill or for a bill. And that's when you get into lobbying territory. So our advocacy toolkit is focusing more on creating and maintaining those relationships so that when you do need something, you're likely to get it. So I don't know why 5 is a different color, but 5 simple steps to become active and engaged in advocacy. Like I said, write a letter after the election to newly elected members of your delegation. So that can be at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level. Invite the members to come to your agency, and right now that would be a Zoom, see what you do. You can include that in your letter and follow up with a phone call. Ask your delegation members if they have questions about what you do or issues that affect survivors and agencies. Remind your delegation you're a resource and happy to provide any information. And then send them a thank you note to follow up with any information they may have asked, and remind that you'll continue to have a dialogue. And when you say this, mean it. Have a dialogue, be a resource. It's a lot better to start from a place where they trust you versus you go to an elected official only when you need something. So let's say that you're going to your first meeting or Zooming or maybe just having a phone call with an elected official, the work that you need to do beforehand. So before meeting with them, go to their campaign website or to their, let's say it's a state legislator, and the NC Leg page, and look through their bills. You can easily just pull up a member's name and it'll say introduce bills as one of the tabs. You can find one or two things you agree on. It doesn't have to be sexual violence. Any other issue would be fine. These are some links to North Carolina House and Senate. But like I said, the toolkit has links to everyone's page as far as our congressional delegation and our senators as well. So you can kind of just look through their past and see something that you do agree on. And let's say they haven't sponsored or co-sponsored any of our legislation in the past. That's fine. Find something, maybe they sponsored a puppy mill bill and you are really passionate about animal welfare. That's something you can connect to them about. And like I said, it highlights those that the members was a main sponsor of, and that'll be helpful for you. When you have that first meeting, and so arrival here is either just showing up, whether that's virtually, whatever that may be. Introduce yourself, let the member know where you live in their district, and thank them for one thing they have done. So just like, thank you for our CARES Act funding. That has helped us by X. We were able to directly help survivors with that funding. Even if they just voted for it, that'd be enough. Once you have thanked them, let them know you're there to start a relationship and a dialogue. That eases a little bit of tension, especially if you're just having a Zoom meeting and they assume that you're there to ask them to do something for you. And you just say, hey, I'm here to start a relationship with you and I want to be a resource, but I'd like to get to know you first. So some issues you can discuss, and again, these would just be educational issues. They would not be lobbying asks. So just talking about funding issues, VOCA, VAWA, if you want to talk about state funding, whatever that may be, you can just talk about that and center it around your program, what that looks like. Have budget cuts hurt you recently? And any statistics would be helpful with that as well. These are some issues that are coming from our legislative agenda. So updating the gendered language from rape statutes, sexting, child marriage, and each of these have their own explainers in the Advocacy Toolkit if you're looking for a little more context on them. When you close that meeting, thank the member for their time, exchange. If you have contact information, you want to send it in a Zoom chat to them or in an email, remind them that you want to have an open dialogue and you want to be a resource. Like I said, mean it when you say it. We have programs who are really engaged with their elected officials, and when something comes up, they call our programs and they have a close relationship with our programs. They will use you as a resource if you're willing to be one to them. And after that initial meeting is complete, like, as I said, we want you to build these relationships with your specific delegation. So on the NC Leg website, if you're looking for who your delegation is, there is a tab that says who represents me, and you can type in your program's address or your home address, and it'll show you who those people are. But again, try to cater it to your specific delegation. We think that you should engage in the political process. We have all this included in our toolkit, and I am always available to talk to you about policy, politics, and any questions you may have about advocacy and work. I just want to go through a couple of things. This is from the toolkit that we had successes with in the last biennium. So one was the Rape Crisis Center funding. While we didn't get a budget increase because there was no budget, we did get that additional $6 million in funding from Federal CARES Act. Withdrawal of consent. We did leave the advocacy for a statute that would allow consent to be withdrawn after initial consent is given. That passed in October 2019 and went into effect December 1st, 2019. Incapacitation. NC CASA also led advocacy for victims of rape and sexual assault who are incapacitated due to voluntary alcohol consumption that could not use their incapacitation as the basis for a second-degree rape or sexual assault conviction. That also passed in October and went into effect December 1st. Both of those overturned bad case law. The withdrawal of consent was from 1979 and incapacitation was from 2008. Another issue was sexual assault evidence collection kits. We advocated for the expansion of sexual assault evidence collection kit language with recommendations from the AG's office and proper funding. So this passed with a full appropriation of $6 million to test kits in a 2-year period. I see there's. So let's talk about our 21-22 NC CASA legislative priorities. Rape Crisis Center. This is going to be at the top of our list until we receive an increase in funding. Like I said, I'm not positive as to what the situation is going to be with the state budget, how much funding the state will have. So once we have those numbers back from the state, I will probably be reassessing. But we have remained steady with Rape Crisis Center funding at $2.895 million for years, about 10. In order to meet that increased demand, we want you all to be adequately funded. And so this is going to be our #1 priority if there is any extra funding. Rape kit funding. You probably just read my slide 2 slides ago that said we were fully funded to test all of the backlogged kits. The AG's office called me maybe 2 weeks ago saying that the price for testing a kit has increased by $500. It went from $730 to $1240 or something similar to that. And so we will be supporting the request from SBI. We're not going to be leading this, but the Attorney General's office says they now need another $9 million to be able to continue to test kits. Another priority that we have is updating and removing gendered language from rape statutes. So I'm sure y'all are acutely aware that the whole 14-27 needs to be updated. Take out vaginal to include all types of intercourse. And so this is just an example of how that would need to be changed. But there is a group of both senators and representatives who are working on a rewrite of the criminal law section. So this could be included in that, but we think that this should be a priority of that working group. And it will need legislation to go through as well. Sexting. So we have had this on the brink for a few years. And just to note, in North Carolina, if a 16 and 17-year-old have sex with each other, that's completely within the law. But if they are consensually exchanging sex, they could be convicted of a felony and forced to register as a sex offender. Sexting is considered child porn. So how do we fix that? A simple approach would be to mimic how we differentiate between indecent liberties with children, which is a felony and a reportable offense for sex offender registry, and indecent liberties between children, which is a misdemeanor that's not reportable. So additionally, we think that probably completion of an educational program should be sufficient to divert charges or expunge charges from a minor's record. But I should say with sexting, we are taking a full look at what other states are doing. There are some states who have passed specific teen sexting bills that are rather punitive in measure, and so we don't want to go that route. We are just looking at how we can go ahead and differentiate sexting from child porn and make sure that we are not charging 16, 17-year-olds with felonies. Child marriage is another priority we have. In order to protect minors in North Carolina and in a lot of other states where North Carolina has sort of become a destination to get married, from the harms of child marriage, we are going to seek to raise the minimum age of marriage to 18. It's the age of legal adulthood. Right now, that age is 14 with parental consent. So we would like to raise that from 14 to 18. North Carolina has the lowest age, tied with Alaska, as the lowest in the nation to be able to be married. There is a ton of research on this, and I'm happy to get you more information. We are in a group of folks who are working on this for this legislative session. Another issue that has been coming up a lot is protection of survivor identity. So our thought is that in order to protect survivor identity during criminal proceedings, we should allow for victims to protect their identity if they choose to do so. This is some language to allow it to be the request of the state, or any of these people can withhold the address or telephone number of a victim, victim representative, or witness before the trial, so that that person can be protected throughout the process. And also that we have had some issues in North Carolina where the media then reaches out to the survivor and the survivor isn't ready to talk or didn't know that their name would be released, and it can be incredibly traumatic. Anti-SLAPP legislation. I bet you're like, wow, you guys have a ton of legislative priorities, and we do. So all of these, like I said, have explainers in the toolkit. And if you want more information, I'm happy to talk to anybody about it. So anti-SLAPP legislation. With the influx of sexual assault survivors coming forward on social media or disclosing to a larger group of people, folks have used the court system to file defamation lawsuits to silence the survivor. So having anti-SLAPP legislation, what does that mean? It just provides a quick, inexpensive mechanism to combat those kinds of suits. So it enables you, if you are the subject of a SLAPP lawsuit, to seek early dismissal and get those legal fees reimbursed. A lot of times, survivors don't have the money to go to court and defend themselves in a defamation lawsuit. This would be able to just make a fairly quick motion to the court and get that lawsuit removed, so they don't have to go through months or years of a lawsuit simply because they chose to disclose. Sane resources. As exemplified in many national reports recently and in state reporting on the accessibility of SANEs, we believe a study into how many SANEs are in the state, the availability of trauma-informed staff to conduct Rape kits, if there aren't enough SANE nurses, should be conducted to better understand and respond to those needs of North Carolinians. So we would propose an audit of hospitals throughout the state. They would have to turn that audit information into the General Assembly, similar to how we audited the rape kits. And then we could assess what the needs for North Carolina are from there. I am going to stop my share for a second and switch over to the toolkit. If you have any questions right now, this would be a great time to stick them into the chat. Okay, I hope everyone can see my screen. This is what our toolkit looks like. So Lauren asked if we're working with anyone on anti-SLAPP legislation. We are. The ACLU has reached out to us about it. We also are working with some media groups who are often targets of this type of lawsuit as well, because in other states where they were successful in passing anti-SLAPP, they have worked with media groups and survivors and also civil rights groups. So we kind of have a coalition for that as well. So this is what the toolkit looks like. It is fairly user-friendly. I'm just going to kind of scroll through it. We talk about nonprofits and lobbying. There are a few pages dedicated to this. I know it looks like a lot of words, but it really kind of explains it in a simplistic way. And my email is plastered all over this if you have questions. The 5 simple steps we talked about earlier are also included. And then you get into our representation. Like, let's say you are in Kathy Manning's district, which is this person. You can click on this and it's going to take you to her page. Since she hadn't been assigned a congressional page yet, it just takes you to her candidate page. But let's say Dr. Murphy, you want to look at Dr. Murphy, it will take you to his house page. And for our senators, it's the same. You can just click on those. It'll take you directly to their pages. And then for the North Carolina General Assembly, like I said, this is House leadership here. And you can click this link here and type in the address of your program or your home address, and it will take you, it'll tell you who your House member is and also your senator. This is Senate leadership. They have elected their majority leader as well. I would say in the House, this is the Speaker, Tim Moore, the Speaker pro tempore, Sarah Stevens, and the majority leader is John Bell. And if you're in any of their districts, that could be incredibly helpful to you as well. Over in the Senate, the president is Phil Berger and the deputy president is Ralph Heiss, and the majority leader over there is Kathy Harrington. So local government, these are local government links as well for whatever county you're in. And then it gets into templates. So like I said, sending a letter right now would be great, or an email. You can copy and paste this into an email. I have a template here for requesting a meeting. And you can change any of this. I'm not married to the language, but definitely cater it to your program. First meeting, this is kind of the same thing I just went through. I have some do's and don'ts of your first meeting. And then the issues to discuss. First of all, you can talk about our legislative successes. I do have a little primer on the federal issue of the VOCA fix, and you can see here that it's North Carolina specific, that we've received a 78.3% cut in VOCA funding over the past 2 years, and a little social media graphic if you'd like to use that as well. And then it gets into our specific issues for North Carolina for 2021, 2022. So updating the rape statutes, it also includes a little social media graphic there. Sexting, which has a ton of links on it, so you can look at other states as well, or there's a really good School of Government post about a couple minors in Fayetteville who were charged with felony child pornography for consensual sex. Child marriage, survivor identity, all the things that we've talked about, anti-SLAPP, and it's kind of a longer response for anti-SLAPP, so it's a little bit longer, and then the same resources as well. And again, my email, which I think someone put in the chat already, how to contact me in order to talk about any of these things, or if you want me to be on your call with a legislator or an elected official, I am happy to do that. So now I would just want to open it up to questions from y'all. Thank you, Lauren, for your comments. We do expect this General Assembly to be fairly welcoming to sexual assault legislation because they were very good to us in the last biennium. So that's what I'm going to say to folks is, hey, you were good to us. Like, we started the work, let's keep going. Lauren asked if we're seeing any pushback in anti-SLAPP. I think there will be pushback, yes. But since the GA hasn't officially started their biennium, I think it'll be once we're a few weeks in and the legislation is filed, I think that's when we'll hear pushback. And I think it'll be similar pushback to what we hear on other sexual assault issues. You know, false claims, things of that nature. After this, we will send out the slides, which will also include our legislative agenda and the toolkit. Yeah, Lauren, thank you for this question as well. This is something that we have heard about a couple of times in just the last few days. But she asked, is there any talk about legislation around cyber flashing? I have not had that conversation until it started to come up simply a few days ago. And so I think that would be something that we would be willing to look at. If you could shoot me an email about that, if you have any particular needs, or you have a case where you could give me the hypothetical about the effect on someone's life, that would be helpful. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, if you have any other legislative asks that you are seeing at your program, or you just have a lot of survivors that seem to have the same issue they're running into, aside from just generally the criminal justice system isn't working, feel free to send those to me at any time. Although this is our legislative agenda, this is a living document, so we will update it as things come up. I will turn it over to Gabriella, who I think has a few announcements.
Hey everyone, this is Gabriella, CASA's Training and Communication Specialist. So this webinar was recorded. It's going to be up on our YouTube channel. Later tomorrow, I will send out an email with all of these resources and also the recording to this. You will also be sent out a survey through Coalition Manager. If you could fill that out, right after you fill that out, we will go ahead and send you your certificate for attending today. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Sky, if there's not any more questions, is there anything else you want to add?
No, just please reach out to me if you need any assistance or want to talk about any of these issues. They're going to be on our plate for the next 2 years, so we have plenty of time to talk about them. And I welcome any help that you can give by contacting your legislators, and we will send out alerts when things are moving to keep you up to date. And of course, it'll be included in member mailings as well. Thank y'all for taking the time today.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Bye.